what was the inspiration behind writing this book, and particularly writing it during this time in your career?
Yeah, so the supplier quality engineer role is a role most people just don't know about. Even if there's an SQE at their facility, they don't always know exactly what they do. And especially for me being in that role, it's an integral part in the supply chain. So you're managing the supplier, the vendors, the supply chain, the quality, anything that can go wrong that's impacting you as a customer from your supply base. That's the SQE's job to get in there and figure out what's wrong. So when you're looking for literature on an SQE, you can't find anything. You can find things on the internet and stuff like that, but there's no actual book. So I wanted to take my years of stories and memories and bring all that together and put it in the book. So really what I want people to take away from it is if you work in the field, you're kind of nodding your head when you're reading through some of these chapters because you're like, yep, I definitely relate to that. And then if you're interested in becoming an SQE, this book kind of gives you the day-to-day and really my story from the last decade on what is it like being there? What are the trials? What are the tribulations? What are some of the outcomes? And then what type of success can you get from it? So I was able to accomplish all that with that. So really happy with the
Yeah.
book.
And that's something I really appreciated, reading this book is that it's very on point. First of all, it's a brief read. It's very compact, very practical
Mhm.
to the point, but it's not a textbook, and I can think back to a lot of the textbooks that, we all went through in college, and it's so abstract, generally speaking, compared to what you actually deal with in the field, working in some of these functions within quality and within manufacturing, particularly in the automotive industry. The other thing I really appreciated about the book was the focus on soft skills, not just the technical side of it. You're not spending an hour talking about APQP. You're talking about the relationships that you have to build in order to be successful, with some of these more technical tools that are required, in a role like SQE. So a couple other questions I came up with here, and really just points of agreement that I wanted to talk about. I'll start with here in your first chapter. You talk about relationships and communication. Is much more important or part of the role of SQE versus technical expertise. And that's certainly something that I've experienced in my career is that the departments and the managers and the functions and engineers that are the most successful are the ones that can lead through influence, rather than delegation. And you mentioned that several times throughout your book, the ability to get things done at suppliers, not just through the 8D complaint system, but through knowing your suppliers and working with them hand in hand. So I thought, you've got several examples in the book. Is there maybe one example that sticks out more than the others of kind of leaning on that relationship versus technical part of the SQE type role?
Yeah, for sure. So when I go to a supplier, I'm typically there for one reason. Something went wrong, and I'm there to investigate what happened. So if you look at it as suppliers and customers, in my opinion, you've lost the moment you walk into the facility. You have decision makers, you have doers, but at the end of the day, we're all people, and people respond to different things. If you go in with the mindset that you're going to throw the hammer down, you're not going to accomplish a whole lot. You've heard the saying, you get more flies with honey than you do vinegar, right? So when I go in, I'm looking at what's the problem, what am I here for, and then making it known that I'm here to support it. So a scenario, we had a tool go down middle of the night. So I get a phone call at probably 1 a.m. This might actually even be in the book. And so the first thing is don't panic. Let's figure out what happened. What is the impact that we're experiencing right now in our production line? And then what can the supplier do to fix it? So we start going through what happened. Do you have any safety stock? And we're not hammering yet. We want to get the production line running. So that's what the focus is. So nothing in the supply chain. So now it's clear I need to get my vehicle. Luckily, this place was in driving distance. It was about 3.5 hours away. So I drive in the middle of the night. I'm there first thing in the morning. The moment I walk in, the maintenance people have been there all night. The plant manager's been there all night. So you have to recognize tensions are a little high. They know they're impacting you. They know they're shutting the line down. They know there's going to be consequences. There's no point in me walking in throwing the hammer, right? So it's what happened? What are we doing about it? How can I help? If you're needing a part, do I have the resource to get that part flown in here? Do you need some technical expertise? Do you need maintenance personnel? What do you need? And that's kind of the approach that I always bring Because then when I build those relationships and I make it clear the moment I walk in, I'm not here to beat you up. I'm here to figure out what happened and let's fix it. We'll really deep dive into what happened later on once the dust settles. The goal right now is to get the supply chain moving again. Then afterwards, we can get into the root cause analysis. We can figure out exactly what caused that to happen. You really have to treat the symptoms up front. But if you only treat the symptoms, then you're never going to resolve the issue and prevent it from happening again. So that's kind of what I go through in that book is let's start with the relationships. When you know you can trust me, we've built this nice rapport, and you know when I come in, we're actually going to help. I even go back to suppliers and I participate in the 8D process. I look at ways how can we improve, and then that really just builds that trust over time. Day one, you're not as successful as you are maybe year one. You know, you're just building that knowledge, that rapport, and those relationships over time. But really, the way you treat people, the way you respond to situations, that's really what's going to determine are you going to be successful or are you not going to be successful. So you can be the smartest guy in the room, but if you're kind of a bully or you come in with a different approach, you may not get the same feedback that you're really wanting. And we all have the same goal. Let's be successful in our own businesses. If you're a tier one, your goal is to sell parts and make money. If I'm the customer, I want to receive those parts, build my components, and make money. So any one of us that hinders that, that becomes a problem, and we have to resolve it.
Yeah, I'm curious if you've seen some of the same shifts in the market that I've experienced. Certainly during the pandemic, I think it started pre-COVID, but then the pandemic really made it a necessity, and that is, a shift away from the demeanor that was sort of indicative of an OEM tier one relationship of I need parts. I need this many. I don't care what it costs, what you have to do to get it here. And I don't care how many you have to scrap in the process of getting me good parts, but that's what's needed. And what the pandemic did was really kind of open up the vulnerabilities that mindset had in sustainability. Not sustainability from an environmental standpoint or just environmental standpoint, but more about, how can we make a vehicle and what do you need as a supplier or as a tier two, tier three suppliers to ensure that and I think that was made really obvious during the pandemic, when you had line shutdowns, lack of raw materials, lack of aggregate materials, and you combine that with the just in sequence or just in time processes of a lot of areas of the supply chain, and you just didn't have the risk tolerance there that we thought was present, with some of these materials throughout the supply chain. So what I've seen evolve, and I'm curious if you've seen it as well, is that that's become more of the standard, let's say, relationship between suppliers and customers is that this is a collaborative effort. We want the supplier to be profitable and to be there 5 years from now when we're launching the next program, so that we're not going through these same learning curves and lessons learned with each vehicle program. And I think it's made for a healthier supply chain experience for really everyone in the industry. I'm curious if you've seen some of the same thing as kind of a broad stroke in the industry.
Yeah, I feel the same way. The only thing I'd add is I've seen a lot bigger push for localization. I know my company, many other ones, it's typically who's the cheapest. We need this product or this material. So then there's a bid comparison. They reach out to multiple sources, and then whoever's the cheapest is what you go with. And depending on the item, a lot of this stuff comes from Mexico, comes from China, it comes from different sources, and that's worked for a long time. The pandemic definitely showed us supply chain matters. So localizing, it's done on some things that make sense, other things that doesn't make sense because of the cost. But you made a good point. Now we look at the risk. Okay, I may pay a little bit more to localize a source, and I may need to invest. And that's something I've seen a lot more of also is OEM tier ones being willing to invest in their tier ones and tier twos and tier threes because they want to remove that risk. If it's in my backyard, I may pay a little more. As we know in the US, the cost is higher. Not necessarily the material, but you're paying for the labor. So, but if it's in my backyard and it's 1 hour away, then my supply chain is a lot less. So you have to kind of weigh the pros and cons. Do you want to secure your supply chain or do you want to pay less for it and then have the risk like the pandemic showed us where you can't get it, whether it's from because it needs to travel sea, air, whatever. So yeah, I've definitely seen localization being a push that we've seen in the industry these last couple of years.
That's certainly a good point with the localization. I saw a lot of sea freight that became unreliable, air freight that became the norm. Astronomical
Exactly.
big expenses of excess freight. Maybe bring us back to more of kind of internal roles of SQE. I wanted to touch on a point that you mentioned here, which is the importance of the SQE function being cross-functional. And focus on quality not being this siloed organization within an organization, but bringing in engineering, operations, and finance into the decisions of a SQE. What would you say to someone that's maybe, let's say they're 5 years out of college, they're in a first engineering role, they're getting into supplier management. What would you recommend in terms of reinforcing that networking within your own company to be cross functional, to be successful, when it comes to cross functional efforts?
Yeah, so there's a saying we have, and that's you cannot inspect quality back into a part. You've probably heard this a bunch of
Yes.
times, but it really starts at the development. So design needs to be involved, engineering needs to be involved, production, logistics, everybody. Quality is a team sport, is what I call it. It's a team sport. If you don't design the proper equipment, you're not going to get the outcome that you're desiring. Right. And so what happens a lot of the times is you're looking for the cheapest machine, the cheapest process, the least amount of headcount to support that process. And you're not looking at things of when I build this product, what risk do I have and what am I going to do to mitigate that risk? We've all seen quotes to the customer where all the bells and whistles are there. We show that we want all these pokeyokes and vision systems, and we tell the customer if we use all this equipment and we follow all of these processes, you're going to get guaranteed good parts the majority, if not all of the time. And it sounds really good when it's just project managers and quality folks talking. But now when we get down to the money aspect of it and we need to start trimming fat, it never fails. Quality controls are the first ones to get cut. And then that's where people like me step in, after the fact, where we've already launched this product and we start going back through the original documentation, looking at the design FEMA and okay, well, you guys identified all of these risks up front. Why didn't you do anything to mitigate them? Well, we did, and it got cut. So then it's that back and forth throughout the whole series life. So when I'm talking to project managers internally or at suppliers, it's we recognize these in the beginning, and I understand we all have businesses to run, and sometimes costs need to get cut. But you have to fight a little bit harder for these things because, especially when you already have the issue, now we get to use that as a lessons learned. So if you know you missed this on the last time, then on your next project, you can use that information to let the customer know or let the buyer you're talking to know this cost us X amount of money, X amount of time lost, and so on. So you can develop that case. But there has to be a bigger push for it. And it's kind of on quality after the fact to try to inspect that quality back into the part. And that just doesn't happen. So it really is a team sport and it's a cross functional effort from day one.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I think that's an important skill, to learn when you're in that role is how to dollarize problems. And you talk about this in your book, presenting things not so much as, hey, we need, less rejections from our customer, because that may or may not resonate with the production manager or even with the finance department. I mean, not that they don't care, but it doesn't speak as loud as, hey, you could reduce, one person from your inspection, head count if we didn't have, these defects present because of a poke-yoke or error proofing, or, hey, we wouldn't have these, sorting costs at the customer if we didn't have, this high of a scrap rate and those types of things. So that's certainly something I experienced, earlier in my career of learning how to, speak in terms of what's in it for them or what's important. And a lot of times I found like, departments are not doing it out of, a selfishness towards their own KPIs, but it doesn't always speak to them as loudly as dollars do. And dollars is just that language that everybody can understand, when it comes to quality issues. So I appreciate how much time you spend on that, in the book. And again, I think if somebody were reading this and they're just starting out, in the role of SQE, that's a huge takeaway. Percentages, number of complaints and rejects, they're great and important KPIs, but if you can turn that into dollars, you're generally more successful in getting the attention that it needs.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
I wanted to pick out another quote from your book here. This is found on page 36 of your book. It says, "Technology enhances quality, but culture sustains it." And that just really resonated with me. We've all seen this where the technology is in place, the equipment's there, but the culture's missing. And you talk about a couple of examples with different suppliers in your book, but maybe could you spend a couple minutes talking about what's an example of something that's effective or how you change the culture in an organization, particularly if you're trying to influence one that you're not, directly, have authoritative control over through your position, or that's not even the organization that you're working in.
Yeah, so I mean, culture is people. So how are we treating the people? What is the mindset of the people? So it takes not just the SQE, but multiple leaders within an organization to kind of push that mindset that we have a customer and we want to please that customer. We want to make sure we're meeting the customer requirements. So in order to meet the customer requirements, we have to hold ourselves to a high standard. And everywhere you go, any industry, it starts at the top. If the top is only figures and dollars, then you're not necessarily going to meet the customer requirements. So set your bar higher so that you can put this, it cascades down to all your different managers. So for me, before I ever became a manager, when I was in a entry level position, I knew I wanted to do a really good job. So some of this culture starts at home. It starts with you as an individual. I want to go to work every day. I want to do a good job. I want to earn my money, and I want to do that the next day, and so on. So it starts with getting rid of your bad apples, because we all have them. So you want to identify those. They're toxic to the culture. Not only are they not going to do a really good job, if you have somebody not performing well and other people are around them performing well and nothing happens to that person, you're creating a culture that it's okay not to do the right thing. So then with your leaders, how are you going to reward the good behavior? Some leaders will say, I'm not going to reward people for doing what they came to work to do. They're getting paid to do a job. They just need to do the job and go home. But that doesn't create your culture. You may meet your KPI with that mindset, but you're not going to change the culture. I want an inviting culture. I want people to come to this place of business and they enjoy their job. I mean, we all have to work for a living. No one really necessarily wants to work, but find that role that you're good at, that you like, and then do the best that you can. For me, coming up in the earlier years, it was more about where I knew I wanted to go. I didn't know where I would end up, but I knew I didn't want to stay where I was at. So I had to have that mindset that I want to come to work, do the right thing, learn everything I can, and then the advancements came. If my only agenda was to become a manager, become a director, become a plant manager, then maybe I wouldn't have taken the same path. It was really learn what I can and see what doors open up. So it's the long game. So I try to put that same mindset into my team. Let's do the job we're getting paid for. And I do this by setting clear expectations. I communicate very effectively. This is what I want. And how you get there, I'm going to leave that up to you. But if you have any roadblocks, let me know and I'm here to support you. Then also have team members that I see it in the background. I feel like they go over and beyond and do a really good job, and I reward them. Whether it's a company sponsored reward, like we bring lunch in for everybody, or if I see that they need something at their desk that they don't have, I'll buy it for them. I give it to them. I say, hey, you did a really good job on these few things. I saw that. I just wanted to recognize by giving you something. So gift giving, you don't have to do it, but for me, I want to show that kind of culture within my plan, my organization. So it really starts at the top. How I act is how I expect the people under me to act. So if I don't have the right mindset, I can't expect them to have the right mindset.
Yeah, that's really good. Points there. Definitely, leading by example. Making sure that the ambitions are well placed. That it's not just about profit metrics, but about individual performance. Contributing to at the end of the day satisfying a customer. A couple other points that I noted here in your book, and this is more about supplier training. Also here in the same chapter, if you had, let's say you were onboarding a new supplier and they were getting close to SOP, to start of production, what types of trainings would you recommend that they have their quality or production or engineering teams go through in order to be successful, that would give you confidence that that program's about to run over its life cycle successfully?
Yeah, so for me, I've always been involved with German OEMs. So we have the VDA 6.3. This was the training that I went through years ago with ENCONA. And this is obviously is what we're auditing suppliers to. So if that's what I'm going to audit you to, then make sure your team, all the key roles that you've identified have this same training. That way you understand the expectations when we audit. No one should like not understand what we're there to audit. If you've taken the same training, the same the same level that we're going to be auditing to, then that kind of gives you an upper hand on the audit. So I've been audited VDA 6.3 on both sides. I've been audited multiple times, and I've conducted those audits multiple times. So now over the years, after I spent a decade auditing people, and now I'm on the tier one side where I get audited, I know exactly what to expect. I know how to be prepared. I know what questions are going to be asked. If I don't remember, you guys provide a book when you do the training so you can refer back to that book. So I always tell them VDA 6.3 for sure, and then core tools training. And then as you're going through the VDA 6.3, it's going to tell you a lot of, make sure you're doing different things. And when you get to your PPAP and things like that, then you can kind of expand as an individual organization, which people do you want with which trainings. But the good baseline is definitely going to be whatever you're going to be audited by.
Yeah, that makes total sense, and I think my experience was the same. Having worked for tier ones, now working for a consulting firm, doing the audits. I've of course seen it from both sides, but I think that alignment of expectations via training to what your customer's going to audit, or whatever external certifications you have are going to be audited to. It's just a necessity. The best case scenario, in my opinion, would be that your external audits aren't something that's happening to you as much as it is somebody else just double checking what you're already doing. And if you've got that training, if you're doing your internal audits and you have that system in place, your external audit, and a lot of times shouldn't be even something you have to, quote unquote, prepare for. It just happens as a normal case of them observing your daily operations. So the more I understood that of auditing being a tool to manage risk, not just something that you have to pass as sort of this hurdle mark once a year, and hey, if we get over that, we can relax for 11 months. That really changed my mindset to the value that can be had by using those standards and having alignment between the supplier and the customer. Just real quick, another point I picked out here. I want to give a quote from page 45. It says, investing in supplier development strengthens the entire supply chain. And, we talk a lot in the industry about value add and non-value add. And I can certainly see, a lot of, I don't want to say hesitancy, but it's expensive, to spend time and resources on supplier development, particularly if you're already purchasing the part. But maybe, did you spend a minute talking about some of the key functions of supplier development that translate to savings or cost avoidance to the customer?
Yeah, so this is a case by case depending on what company you work for and where they want to make the investments. I've been very fortunate to be with a company that doesn't look at them as just suppliers, but they're process partners. So if you're a really good supplier, 0 PPM, no quality claims, we're still going to call you. And then every once in a while, we're going to come visit you. Now, they're short visits, they're short calls because there's been no problems, but we want to call and check on you, see how you're doing. I do like to visit those suppliers as well because they are doing something very right. So I want to come in and visit their facility, see what they're doing. Do they have a lot of poke yolks in there? How are their processes laid out? How do their work instructions look like? Because whatever they're doing is working. And we all have a lot of suppliers that have the opposite. They're not doing very good. They have a high PPM. They have a lot of claims. So I like to go visit those suppliers too. But not every company allows you to do that because that's flights, that's hotel cost. My company does that. Now, they're not going to allow it every day, but when, hey, I want to go look at the, supplier development, it's no problem. So that's more of the culture that you can't control on a manager level, but that the organization themselves can control. And we do and did visit really good supplier. We had them categorized A, B, C, D. If you were a D, you were a very low performing supplier, but if you were A, no problems whatsoever between quality, delivery, and so on. But communicate with those suppliers too to understand what they're doing right, because you may learn things that you can use to suggest some improvements for the ones not, basically that don't have the same type of scorecard. So you want to reach out to both of them, and that takes, that's corporate making those decisions. So if you're in that situation, make sure you're going and looking at the good suppliers. You're going to learn a lot.
Yeah, that's a good point, and I've never heard that phrase before, but I really like it—a process partner. Because I spend a lot of times talking with different suppliers when we're teaching 8D or working on a project, of getting that mindset around. We're not just making a component, a plastic part or a metal part. We're part of a value stream of making a vehicle, and what does it take to make a vehicle safe and affordable and effective and enjoyable for the consumer. And that's a nuanced difference, but it's important because if you care about the impact your component has on the subassembly and the subassembly on the vehicle, and ultimately what the consumer of that vehicle, the driver experiences, it does change the mindset in terms of what does it take here for this to be sustainable, effective, and safe, and for the end product to be what we're all working towards. So I like that term, process partner. It really speaks to the partnership of making this process effective for making a world class vehicle. Another point I wanted to touch on here, further on in your book, you're talking a lot about the 8D process, or tool for solving problems, and root cause analysis. Talk a little bit, if you will, about firefighting versus root cause analysis. And you talk about it in your book. We've all seen it in industry as well, where you have the 8D filled out with the exact same root cause over let's say 4 times in the same year. So there's something missing. So again, maybe from the standpoint of, let's say somebody picks up your book, they're looking to be a SQE, what would you tell them as sort of telltale signs of when you have firefighting versus root cause analysis happening?
Yeah, the firefighting, it never fails. You're going to see those 8Ds where their action is retrain the operator. So then if you have a process background, your process should be set up in a way that theoretically anyone can step into that role and do it, because it's very clear instructions. It's a very clear process. You have to use this tool to put this part together, and that's it. It's when you allow that to be deviated. You don't have a standard process. You don't have equipment set up for that. So when I see supplier operator retraining as the root cause and corrective action on an 8D, I immediately reject it, because that is not going to resolve this from happening again. If human error plays a part, you'll never resolve it. So it goes back to, if you want to be reactive, just keep doing your containments and letting all that money go out the window. But if you want to be proactive, really focus on your 8D problem solving. That's one thing where I mentioned 8D a lot. One of the feedbacks that I got, someone purchased the book. They reached out to me, said they read it. They're not in manufacturing. They are not a supplier quality engineer. So it was somebody that had nothing to do with this industry that read it and found me through a connection and said, I wanted to let you know, just for feedback, I saw 8D over and over again in your book. I had no idea what an 8D was, and you didn't really explain it in your book. So I was able to research it. And once I researched it and knew what an 8D was, I was like, oh, that makes perfect sense. So I was like, so if I ever do a revision 2, I'm going to do a whole chapter on 8Ds, because that is something near and dear to the quality, supplier quality, logistics. Everybody wants 8Ds when there's a failure. So yeah, establishing that team, understanding what type of team you need to put together, and then identifying the problem, talking about it. There's a quote that I always use when I go into suppliers or even internally when we're doing 8Ds. It was from Einstein, who said, if I have 1 hour to resolve a problem, I'm going to spend like the first 50 minutes talking about it and the next 10 minutes resolving it. So I tell them the same thing when you're doing an 8D. Let's really talk about the problem. Let's all understand it from our different point of views, and then let's figure out where is the root cause. Because once you identify the root cause, and that's the biggest challenge, is what happened, especially those one-offs. When you have a one-off, the part is just not usable, whatever the case is. And it's not something obvious like a short shot where it's from startup, but just something happened and it only happened once. You get two reactions. One is it's a one-off, we're not going to do anything about it. Well, then how do you put that in an 8D and want the customer to sign off on it, right? And then the second one is we really have to understand it. Even if it's once, it can happen again. Now, when things happen repeatedly over and over again, and you get a lot of claims, you get a lot of attention. But if you follow the same process, really understand what happened, then you can resolve it. And then you can go the next level and prevent it from ever happening again. And if you can put some type of method where it never happens again, that's one less defect that you have to worry about. And then on your next project launches, take that as your lessons learned and apply that to there, whether it's in the design phase or whatever you've done to prevent it. Make sure you keep reading that across anything else that could have that same impact. So I feel like there's not enough attention on root cause. There's a big attention on can we rework the parts? Can we do a containment and just kick out everything that's bad? But like we talked about earlier, all of that comes with a dollar figure. Every time you throw something away that you spent time and resources to build, that's less profitability from your company. And another piece of advice, in my personal life, I'm very stingy. I don't spend money unless I need to. I mean, we have bills that take priority, and then we plan very effectively for trips. So when you're in a position where you manage a budget, treat that money like it was yours. Not meaning go and spend it on all these frivolous things, but if that company, somebody runs that company and that's their money. That's not your money to spend however you want, but treat it like if it was yours. Before I buy something, is it going to increase my profitability or is it going to increase my sales? Most of the time you can't increase your sales because we all have forecast and we know what the demand is in the future, but you can control your profitability. So that was really something that I've wouldn't say live by, but it's something that I put in practice every single day. Before people ask you
Yeah,
to spend money constantly, and it's what is it going to do for us? What's the return? And don't just sit there and click the button saying yes, yes, yes over and over again. They're going to cut you off from that budget.
yeah, that's some really good points there, and you're right. A lot of the defects that occur in manufacturing, particularly in automotive, you can't all be solved by a vision system, or you can't put an error proof on everything that might possibly happen. What you can do is improve the existing processes to be more robust. But yeah, taking it back to an 8D report, for an example, I think you're right on point. The main things I look for would be, is it attributable to human error? Is that listed as the root cause, often an error, or is the root cause some sort of sorting, supervisor or team lead oversight, additional spot checks, anything that's increasing the possibility for human error is also going in the wrong direction. So those are usually the things that I look for as well. But you touched on some really good points. Also, mentioning about 8D, from your book. If you're not familiar, I think we'll put a link in the description as well here for AD training. Moving a little bit further into some of the other chapters of your book, you talked about the importance of having an SME when it comes to supplier mindset. And I'm getting this from later in your book on page 73. You're talking about KPIs, you're talking about overcoming the resistance of change. What does it take, I guess, from an SME standpoint, of understanding your supplier's process and pain points to get them on board with the changes that need to happen to improve KPIs?
Yeah, so you definitely have to be able to show the long-term savings and help them see the customer expectations. I know we've touched on it a few times, but the immediate things, maybe the supplier's not willing to do, like the different containments, adding this poke yoke, but that's where you have to bring it together. Small, medium suppliers definitely typically don't have the same type of resources or funding, so everything is scrutinized. They only have so much of a budget. If it's something that's causing a lot of lost profit, because there's penalties when you ship a bad component, not just to your KPIs, but there's a financial charge for that. If you get put
Sure.
on an escalation, most customers have a monthly or quarterly charge for being on that escalation. And then in addition to that, when I worked at an OEM, if I had to visit your location because you were on some form of escalation, you're also taking all the calls from the flights, the hotels, everything. So you put all that together and show them, I know you're saying you don't have this, let's call it $5,000 in your budget, but I've been here 4 times now and we've debited you over like $70,000. So when you can break it down in those terms, then typically they can get the funding approved. If not, they don't want to hemorrhage and just lose money forever. So
Mhm.
it's really taking it back to dollar amount and what you're losing versus what we can avoid you losing for this one-time investment.
Yeah, that makes sense, and certainly I think the SQEs that that I've interacted with throughout my career, the ones that garnered the most respect and that got the most action from either me as a supplier or me as the customer, and then working at a supplier, are the ones that knew the supplier's processes almost as well as the supplier. So they were talking apples to apples on pain points. They knew the raw material, they knew the storage material transfer processes. Whether it was an injection molding plant or assembly plant, they knew what they were asking their supplier to do. So it wasn't just I don't care, go sort it. I don't care, implement a new machine or change the tooling. It was, I know what I'm asking you to do. I understand your FMEA, and I think this is the only way to address this risk. What can we do again together, collaboratively, to bring the risk down? So I think that's a good point. I want to also talk about Chapter 10. So Chapter 10 of your book is leadership and supplier quality, and here on page 89, you touched on something we spoke about earlier, which is building trust and collaboration. One of your key takeaways you put here is that developing strong relationships with suppliers to encourage transparency and proactive problem solving. So, maybe not just building relationships on a personal level, but how do you build that trust between companies to collaborate such that they're willing to share information? Maybe sometimes the problem is a combination of two factors. A lot of things that I see are tolerance stack up. So it's not just the supplier, it's not just the customer, but together they've got to solve this problem. So, what would be some key points you would add to that when it comes to, building that trust and collaboration between companies to solve problems?
Yes, yeah, you definitely influence through relationships. With the SQE, you really essentially have zero direct authority. Within your organization, you're essentially the lowest man on the totem pole. Nobody in your organization works for you. And it's really the same at a supplier, like that plant manager and quality manager, all these different levels. None of them work for me, but I'm the customer, but I can't force them to do what they don't want to do. So I have to influence through my relationships, and that starts with building that credibility. What we spoke about, I'm willing to come in and sit down and do an AD with you. I will come in and train your team. We're going through the trenches together. You mentioned it in the last question, which was a good point that I didn't mention. I know my suppliers' processes really well because it starts with visiting their facilities, not just for an audit. I just want to get an understanding on the lay of the land. How's the layout? Where are all your machines focused at? What's your warehousing look like? That way, when I'm giving suggestions, like you said, I'm not just saying frivolously, like we'll just add a machine. If I've been to that location and I know they're utilizing every square inch of it, then you can't add another machine. So we have to focus on things more like your planning, your schedule, what's the amount of hours you're working? Can we add in a weekend shift? Do we need to balance it out? I mean, and then maybe me as the customer, I'm pulling more than what their Monday through Friday capacity allows, but then I'm penalizing them for not meeting those targets. Maybe my forecast was here, and then I'm actually asking for product up here. So those are things that you have to be able to understand as an SQE. So when you come in with a fair, balanced, and knowledgeable approach, you start building that relationship. And then your internal team, they see the same thing. They see what your results are. You can tell very quickly in an organization who's a good SQE, who's not as an effective SQE. So your leadership knows that. They know when you go into a supplier location and you come back with feedback, you've built this rapport over time that what you say, they know you can stand by it. There's no questioning it. So you have to build that rapport internally And then you have to show that same credibility externally. So now I can go to both sides and they both know that I hold myself at a certain level. I bring a certain set of skills and knowledge, and then both sides are they're agreeing with that. So yeah, it just becomes solution focused and people listen to people that bring results.
Yeah, that's right on point. One of the things that I guess I failed to mention earlier in our discussion here, but I like that you bring it up several times throughout your book, is that quality is not just a good part or conforming part. There's also the delivery aspect to it. And to me, if you can communicate that to a supplier, particularly to the plant manager, production manager, that, hey, I'm not just here to keep you from shipping parts or to sort everything. I'm here because I want as many parts as you can produce for me, as long as it's meeting my EDI schedule. And sometimes quality can have that. I don't want to say negative, but adverse sort of identification to production. In other words, sometimes it can feel like production's trying to run wide open and quality's keeping them from doing that because they're stopping production to fix this issue or to inspect these parts. So maybe touch on that. Again, if you're working in quality and you're SQE now, or you're going out and becoming an SQE, how did you find during that time in your career balancing the importance of delivery and quantity production versus good parts, conforming parts, and quality?
Yeah, right off the top, a conforming part that delivers late is a failure. If you have that great part sitting there, but then you've tied it up in the supply chain, then you've already failed. So there's definitely a correlation between quality and this aspect, quality inspection and delivery. So I learned it basically day one when I'm doing a quality inspection. Then yeah, that's not in the normal process. That part's already gone through the normal process. Most chances are you're doing that containment at the end of the line or in the warehouse. Either way, you're preventing this from going on a truck and shipping, right? So you have to have that balance. If you're inspecting in real time at the end of the line, you're kicking parts out that are not okay. The parts that are okay, don't let them sit in a quality cage somewhere certified. If you need to be setting up expedites, you need to be in constant communication with logistics. Because yeah, that's a quality metric that falls back on you as the SQE. It may be somebody else's KPI, but you are impacting them from reaching their KPI because of what you're doing. So you have to ensure parts are moving. And then if there's a rework, if it's a rework process and I can do this rework at my location versus the supplier, then I'm going to start it at my facility if that's what it takes to keep the production line moving. And then I can also replicate that rework process at the supplier until we reach a clean build. Get a clean build, meaning that starting with this shipment, everything coming from the supplier is okay, then I can stop the containment activities in my plant. But yeah, you have to find the balance between them both, because the meantime you're finding great parts, the supplier's warehouse is full of them, but you haven't shipped anything because everything's on quality hold, then yeah, you're having the same impact. Instead of bad parts, now there's no parts.
Yeah, yeah, that's all. It's certainly very relative to the conversation of total quality experience of the customer. And one of the things that I teach, for example, when we're talking about solving quality issues and delivery issues, is that take an extreme example. If you order something, picture your favorite product, be it a book, a bicycle, whatever. If you have to wait 80 years to receive it, you can't experience the quality of that product. So the quality experience of the product is diminished. And obviously that's an extreme example, but if you cut that down to days, weeks, or sometimes even hours by not having the thing, component, whole vehicle, whatever, you're impacting the quality experience of your customer or the end customer, depending on the situation. So yeah, I think taking that balanced approach of it's good parts, but it's also a lot of parts when they're needed, and that's the role of supplier quality. You mentioned an important metric here, and I want to go back to page 68, reducing the total cost of ownership. And I really like how you're talking about looking at this holistically rather than just the piece price, particularly when we're talking about running a multi-year vehicle program. Can you break that down a little bit? The total cost of ownership and how that differs from just piece price, for example.
Yeah, when we're looking at total cost, we're looking at, of course, the piece price. This is what I'm purchasing this item for. But then the total, I'm looking at rework, warranty claims, freight, any type of disruption. Because if there's a lot of claims in the field after the fact, warranty claims, then this also adds a cost. So if I'm looking at total cost, a buyer might really like that part because it's really cheap. And maybe it passes through all of our inspections, but then once it gets to the field, it doesn't do what it's supposed to do and it fails. So now you have all your warranty claims. Well, that's a big cost. And to me, even a bigger impact. When we're talking about after sales, these are impacting the brand consumer. So we're talking about vehicles. So if I work for an industry where I'm producing parts for a certain vehicle, and now I'm impacting not just the production line that's making these vehicles, but the actual consumer, then that is going to tarnish the brand. They don't look at it. If I bought this vehicle, I don't care that it came from it was assembled at an OEM, but a part was purchased from a tier one and then a tier two and then a tier three. They associate everything with the brand. So if their vehicle fails in the field, to them, that is the brand's fault. So tier ones, twos, threes, and so on, they can really impact a brand. So you have to look at that. That's what we mean when we talk about total cost. What are the things outside of just purchasing and assembling this part? Are there any cost outside of that? And those are costs that you want to make sure you're analyzing when you look at, is this really the best supplier for us? We have a lot of field claims. I may be able to go to a supplier that costs a little bit more, but there's no field claims. Their current supply has really good scorecards. They're not reporting any type of warranty claims or field claims or reworks. So that's what you want to look at. That's what we mean by total cost of quality.
That's great. Thank you for breaking that down. And you're so right in that, thinking about it as a consumer, it doesn't matter if I'm, taking the cap loose on, the oil to change the oil in my vehicle, or putting air in the tire, or a piece of trim on the interior. It's all the brand of the OEM, and
Hmm.
everything that could go wrong or does go wrong from time to time throughout the life cycle of using a product, I associate it with the OEM, not with, which tier one I think might have made that product, during that production year. So, but again, thank you for breaking that down. I wanted to maybe go a little bit more high level here with, just relating a lot of what you've put in your book with the sort of my career, and it really added to my enjoyment in reading the book. And I'm taking it here from page 120. And it's talking about your lesson number 6. So thinking beyond the role and planning for the future. You're right. Many SQEs eventually transition into managerial roles, becoming leaders in quality, operations, or supply chain management. The skills you develop in this role, problem solving, data analysis, supplier management, conflict resolution, are invaluable stepping stones to higher leadership positions. And I'll start with just saying, that was a lot of my experience as well. I became an ISO auditor, an IETF auditor earlier in my career. I was still in manufacturing and projects and quality and doing first article inspections earlier in my career. But that, looking back on it, was certainly a building block that helped me understand those different functions in order to be a better leader when I eventually became, the superintendent of a plant manager of a plant, and eventually director of operations, because I understood, those facets of management that went into having a successful and sustainable supply chain. And then when problems occurred, you knew how to apply resources to help the people in those roles be successful with solving them. So I just want to touch on that as something I can certainly relate to, and maybe want to add something to that. Certainly somebody is watching this, and they're at that point in their career, but they have the same aspirations of being a plant manager or director one day. Maybe add something to that.
Yeah, you hit a lot of the points, but yeah, it's when I started talking to, and we can say interviewing people as I was writing this book, general managers, plant managers, directors, something not all of them had in common, but what a lot of them had in common is they all came from quality backgrounds. So yeah, you can have a different background and still make it to a leadership role and be a successful leader. But one common denominator is a lot of these folks came from quality backgrounds, and then even more supplier quality backgrounds. And you really see it when you're managing suppliers. You're essentially a consultant for that plant. So you are looking at what is wrong and how can you address it. And within those organizations, that is the role of the directors, the plant managers, general managers, department managers. So really, at a level that's not a manager, you're looking through the lens of people that are in that role. And earlier in my career, I didn't understand that fully. I was focused on learning everything I can, improving my skills, not realizing that later down the line, those skills and knowledge that I had, that makes you a really successful manager. People management, something separate that we talk about in the book. But when I'm looking at these processes, yeah, all these skills that I have from an SQE, that's the same decision making lens that I'm looking through. So I was able to go from a supplier quality engineer. We'll touch on that a little bit. I started off at a tier one as a quality liaison. I had no experience of manufacturing whatsoever. I had a friend who had an opening and he wanted me to come. He knew my interpersonal communication skills and kind of like a salesy background, if you will. He's like, I need a quality liaison. I need some, and I'm like, I have no idea what a quality liaison is. He's like, you'll love it. You'll love it. Trust me. Right? Thanks, Giorgio. So I worked for a tier one supplier. I was put at an OEM. So I'm there, don't know what to expect, but I was told my job's pretty easy. The customer will let me know when there's a problem. I will take the notes. I will relay that back to my plant. They'll give me feedback and I'll address that to the customer. Sounds pretty easy, right? But then you have quality issues and they want immediate containment. And I'm calling my buddy, they want a containment. What is that? But it puts you in the lion's den really quick. And I got to learn what is quality, what is the expectation, what is a containment, what is rework, and then like if there's something like an engineering change and whatever the intention was, it went wrong. Well, now you're sitting in a meeting with a group full of engineers explaining what they wanted versus what you gave them. So you start getting all this experience. So I took this for almost 4 years. And then by the time I left that role, I kind of knew what the customer's expectation was from a quality standpoint, production matrix, logistics, engineering. You learn all of it. So that was the building blocks. That was really my foundation in manufacturing. So I actually left that OEM because I got promoted from liaison to a customer quality engineer. So I went to the tier one I was working for at the time and then kind of worked through the ranks a little bit, went from customer QE to production QE to then the senior quality engineer. And I was only there for about a year, but after leaving that OEM, the connections and relationships I made there, they called me and said, hey, I know you're in that role now, but you did a phenomenal job when you were here. And now that you've gone back to that location, we've seen a really big improvement in the overall, KPIs. And they offer me a job to come back to that OEM now as their employee managing their supply base. And that's kind of where I became an SQE. It was all quality before then, and then I became an SQE. And then from there, that was my step and that was my foot in the door. That was my first step in a supplier quality engineer role. So then took all the skills and what I can learn from there. And then I took an opportunity with another OEM. It was an advancement, it was more money, and I would be able to showcase more of my skills and learn more, then learn more skills on top of that. So I took that role for a few years and then decided to go back to the tier one because what I found out, which I didn't know beforehand, once you go work at an OEM, especially multiple OEMs and large companies, and you learn all of these different skills, tier ones will pay really good money for you to come and work for them and do these same things. So I joined the company I'm with now as a supplier quality engineer, but with a twist. They only wanted me to manage and focus on suppliers with poor performance. So a lot of traveling, a lot of late night phone calls. But if you were a supplier that did not perform very well, then I'm the one that would go to your site for a day, a week. Sometimes I was on site for up to 3 months. And we're just in the trenches working through how do we fix it. Sometimes it's quality related. Sometimes it's HR related, like they don't have staffing. So then you're working with local staffing agencies to try to bring people in there. You're helping them train these folks. Again, it's all about shipping parts on time. So whatever methods we can do to do that. So then with my same company, I got promoted to supplier quality manager because again, the skills has shown that I'm really good at managing the suppliers I have. Now let's manage all of the suppliers and all the SQEs. And then my company did another turn. It's like, you do a really good job at developing all of them, but we have our own issues internally. Take that same mindset in the same way that you're resolving their problems, come resolve our problems. So then all the traveling stopped. And then that's when I transitioned into operations. So I got my own production team that I was managing, and then from there went into an operations manager role, and then now today I'm over all aftermarket and after sales. So when we talk about service and things like that, that's why it's very near and dear to my heart. It's been a culture change because for the last decade I've been focused on keep this series production line running, and every decision you make is not to impact the production line at your OEM customer. Well, now my position has I've had to change focus because now I'm more with how we talked about the brand customer, the one buying the
Sure.
final product. There's fender benders in the field, there's rocks that hit cars. Every time that happens, you take your car to a dealership or to a body shop, you have to order a part back from that tier one. So I didn't really understand this until I got into the business for years. So when you order that, you're now competing. I need to sell parts to service because we have a customer with a vehicle in the field that needs this replacement part. But my plant's focus is also I have to keep the assembly line running at my customer. So now you're
Yeah.
kind of fighting in between both. So it's opened up a new level of appreciation for anybody that works in service. So it's working with planners, it's trying to plan it properly, it's trying to get trying to prioritize service parts because service doesn't necessarily pay the bills, but you do have an obligation for the next 15 years after SOP to provide these service parts. So yeah, if you would have asked me 10 years ago, where do you see yourself in 10 years? I would have told you supplier quality. But all of these skills and what you learn opens up doors. And you don't know what doors it's going to open, but you have to be willing to take the challenge, get out of your comfort zone. But yeah, at the same time, know that you've learned all of these skills that are really going to be valuable later down the line. And that's kind of what happened to me. I couldn't have forecasted it that it was going to happen this way, but that was just where the journey took me. But you have to be willing to take those steps.
Yeah, thank you for that overview. It's certainly again similar from reading your book to my background and the stepping stones, and I think we're well aligned on the value that having that experience brings. Throughout those different phases of your career. Well, I want to thank you for taking time to go through the book together. I really enjoyed it. I want to, as a way of wrapping up, just talk about your book directly. So the book is Quality in Every Step by Taylor Cox. And it's a great read. I would highly recommend it, for anyone that's in quality or looking to go into quality, or maybe you're already, working in quality, even in a management position or engineering role. I think it's a great practical manual on a good approach to supplier quality engineering and supplier quality management. So, Taylor, again, thank you for your time. And any final comments from you?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for the training that ENCONA has provided. This has been instrumental in my career over the years. And then thank you for promoting the book and reading the book. It's been a lot to me, and I do appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time. And for people looking to purchase the book, it's available on Amazon.